Before the ink on the divorce papers had even dried, the man who had spent years believing his wife would never leave him stood frozen in the middle of a crowded courthouse lawn, watching her walk away without looking back even once. There were no angry words, no dramatic tears, no desperate pleas. She simply carried a small folder in one hand, smiled politely at a stranger who held the door open for her, and stepped into the bright afternoon sunshine with the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived the hardest part. That was the exact moment he realized something far more painful than losing a marriage. He realized she no longer needed him, and she hadn't for a very long time. If you believe kindness can heal broken hearts, forgiveness can change lives, hope deserves another chance, and every person has the power to grow beyond their worst mistakes, please take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our community. For nearly 23 years, Everett and Maren had lived what most people believed was a stable marriage. Their neighbors admired the perfectly trimmed front lawn, their relatives complimented the family gatherings, and co-workers often joked that they were the kind of couple who would grow old together on matching porch chairs. Very few people noticed that appearances often hide the quietest tragedies. Everett worked hard, paid every bill on time, and convinced himself that providing financially was the same thing as loving deeply. He rarely shouted, rarely caused public embarrassment, and never believed he was doing anything terribly wrong. In his own mind, he was simply being practical. Maren, meanwhile, slowly disappeared inside the routine of making everyone else's life comfortable while forgetting what happiness even felt like. Every afternoon she prepared meals that were barely acknowledged, folded clothes that no one thanked her for washing, remembered birthdays, scheduled appointments, comforted relatives, and quietly repaired every emotional crack inside the family before anyone else even noticed they existed. She wasn't ignored in one dramatic moment. She was ignored thousands of tiny times. Every unfinished conversation, every interrupted sentence, every cancelled plan, every forgotten anniversary, and every promise of maybe next weekend became another invisible brick in a wall that eventually separated two people living under the same roof. Everett believed silence meant peace. Maren knew silence often meant surrender. Years passed, and something remarkable began happening without Everett paying any attention at all. Maren started changing. She enrolled in afternoon art classes at the local community center after finishing her daily responsibilities. She rediscovered painting, something she had loved before marriage. Her instructors encouraged her talent, and soon her artwork began appearing in local exhibitions. Complete strangers admired pieces that reflected resilience, healing, and quiet strength. The confidence she received from people who appreciated her efforts awakened a part of herself she thought had disappeared forever. Instead of asking Everett for permission, she simply informed him of her plans. He barely looked up from his phone each time, responding with distracted nods that sounded more like habit than interest. When she mentioned selling her first painting, he congratulated her without asking what she had painted. When she explained she had been invited to teach beginner classes, he simply reminded her not to forget to pay the electricity bill. Every missed opportunity to celebrate her became another reminder that her greatest supporter had become a stranger living beside her. The following year brought even more unexpected changes. Maren earned enough income from teaching and selling artwork to open a small daytime studio in a renovated storefront filled with sunlight and fresh flowers. Families visited together, retired couples discovered hidden creativity, children laughed while covering canvases with colorful imagination, and people recovering from grief found peace through painting. Her little studio became known not only for art but for hope. She no longer waited by the window wondering when Everett would come home. She no longer arranged her happiness around his schedule. She built a life that stood on its own. Everett noticed changes, but he interpreted them through the dangerous confidence of someone who believed comfort was permanent. He assumed marriage was like gravity. It would always exist regardless of effort. Whenever friends joked about divorce statistics, he smiled confidently because he couldn't imagine Maren ever leaving. She was dependable. She was patient. She always forgave. He never asked how much forgiveness costs the person constantly giving it. One bright autumn afternoon, while organizing supplies inside her studio, Maren found an old photograph tucked inside a sketchbook. It showed two young people sitting beside a river during college, laughing without worrying about careers, mortgages, or expectations. She remembered the promises they had once made about always listening, always growing together, and never taking one another for granted. Looking at that faded picture didn't fill her with anger. It filled her with clarity. She realized she had spent years mourning a relationship that had quietly ended long before either of them admitted it. Over the following months she suggested counseling more than once. Everett insisted they were fine. He argued that every marriage became routine eventually. He believed dissatisfaction was simply part of adulthood. Since there were no explosive arguments, no betrayals, and no dramatic scandals, he assumed there was nothing worth fixing. Maren understood something he didn't. Relationships rarely collapse because of one terrible day. They slowly fade after countless ordinary days when love is replaced by assumption. The afternoon she handed Everett the divorce papers was surprisingly peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Fresh bread cooled on the counter. Birds chirped outside as though nothing extraordinary was happening. She placed the envelope beside his coffee cup before leaving for another afternoon at the studio. He laughed. He honestly believed she was trying to frighten him. He didn't even open the envelope until hours later. When reality finally settled in, disbelief turned into frustration. Frustration became panic. Panic transformed into desperate promises that arrived years too late. He bought flowers she no longer wanted. He suggested vacations she no longer needed. He planned romantic dinners for someone who had spent decades eating emotional loneliness. For the first time, Everett listened carefully to everything she had been saying for years. Unfortunately, he was listening to memories instead of conversations because she had already stopped repeating herself. Friends who had always admired Everett struggled to understand. They insisted he wasn't a bad man. They were right. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't unfaithful. He simply believed love could survive indefinitely without attention. That belief cost him everything. The legal process remained respectful. There were no shouting matches or attempts at revenge. Maren treated Everett with kindness throughout every meeting because leaving bitterness behind had become part of her healing. She wasn't divorcing him because she hated him. She was divorcing the life where she constantly abandoned herself to keep someone else comfortable. The afternoon the divorce became official, Everett watched her leave the courthouse exactly as she had entered it, calm, composed, and surprisingly hopeful. Weeks later, curiosity led him toward her art studio during a warm afternoon. Through the large windows he saw children laughing while parents painted beside them. Elderly neighbors proudly displayed colorful landscapes. Volunteers served coffee and welcomed newcomers by name. Maren moved through the room encouraging nervous beginners with patience and genuine joy. She looked alive. Not because she was finally alone. Because she had finally remembered who she was. Everett didn't go inside. He stood quietly across the street, realizing he had spent years searching for appreciation at work while failing to appreciate the greatest gift waiting at home every single day. That afternoon became the beginning of his own transformation. Instead of drowning inside regret, Everett chose accountability. He began volunteering at community organizations during daylight hours, helping renovate parks, mentoring young fathers, and attending workshops about healthy relationships. At first he secretly hoped becoming a better man might somehow bring Maren back. Eventually his reason changed. He wanted to become better because the next person he disappointed might not get another chance either. Months turned into years. The bitterness that could have consumed both of them slowly dissolved into quiet respect. Maren expanded her studio into a larger creative center where people recovering from grief, divorce, illness, and loneliness discovered confidence through art. Her paintings traveled to exhibitions across the region, each one carrying pieces of her journey without needing to explain every scar. Everett rebuilt relationships with family members he had neglected while chasing professional success. He learned to ask questions and truly wait for answers. He learned that listening is an act of love. He discovered that gratitude loses meaning when left unspoken. One bright spring afternoon, fate placed them together at a charity event supporting local youth programs. Their reunion wasn't filled with dramatic music or impossible romance. It was filled with something rarer. Peace. They greeted each other warmly. They smiled sincerely. Neither carried resentment anymore. Everett thanked Maren for teaching him the lesson he had refused to learn while they were married. He admitted losing her forced him to become the person he should have been all along. Maren accepted his gratitude with gentle compassion. She had already forgiven him long before that afternoon, not because he deserved it, but because forgiveness had set her own heart free. They walked through the event for a few minutes discussing the young artists displaying their work and the volunteers helping families throughout the sunny afternoon. Then their paths naturally separated again. Neither looked back. Not because they no longer cared. Because they had both learned that healing sometimes means appreciating the past without trying to live inside it. Before we reach the end of this story, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment sharing the lesson that touched your heart the most. Do you believe love can survive without appreciation, or do you think gratitude must be shown every single day? Your words may encourage someone who needs hope right now. Years later, people who met Maren saw a confident artist whose kindness inspired entire communities. Few realized that her greatest masterpiece had never hung inside a gallery. It was the life she courageously painted for herself after believing she had nothing left. People who met Everett saw a thoughtful, humble man who listened carefully before speaking and never allowed another important relationship to drift into silent neglect. Few realized his greatest achievement wasn't professional success. It was accepting responsibility without blaming anyone else. Their marriage ended. Their humanity did not. Sometimes the happiest ending isn't two people finding their way back to each other. Sometimes it's two broken people finding their way back to themselves. And perhaps the most heartbreaking truth of all is that many relationships don't end when someone stops loving. They end when someone grows tired of loving alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May this story remind us all that appreciation should never wait until goodbye, that kindness spoken today is worth more than regret spoken tomorrow, and that every sunrise gives us another opportunity to love the people beside us before they discover they no longer need us to be happy.